Alright, let me take you back to where it all began. It was at this party, you know, the kind where you're not really excited to go but end up having the time of your life. That's where I met Alex. Our friends, who were hosting, had been trying to set us up for ages. They said we'd hit it off, and damn, were they right. So there I was, standing with a drink in my hand, feeling kind of out of place in a crowd of strangers, when Alex walked over. He had this easy smile and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. "Hey, I'm Alex. You must be the famous Sarah I've heard so much about," he said, extending his hand with a cheeky grin. I remember laughing, the ice in my drink clinking as I shook his hand. "Famous? I think you've been fed some tall tales." "Nah," he chuckled. "Just that you're supposed to be the life of the party." "Well, let's not let the rumors down," I replied, and from that moment, we just clicked. We talked about everything and nothing, from our favorite movies to the most embarrassing things we'd ever done. It felt like talking to an old friend, someone I could be myself with without any pretense. As the night went on, we found ourselves away from the crowd, sitting on the back porch, sharing stories under the stars. It was one of those conversations that felt like it could go on forever. "You know, my friends thought this would be a good setup, but I think they underestimated how much we'd actually get along," Alex said, looking genuinely surprised. I smirked, taking a sip of my drink. "Yeah, I was ready to bail the minute I got here. Glad I didn't." "That makes two of us," he replied, his eyes locking with mine in a way that made my heart skip a beat. Just then, some drunk guy stumbled out onto the porch, breaking the moment. "Hey, you two gonna make out or what?" he slurred, causing both of us to burst out laughing. "Get lost, man," Alex said, not missing a beat, but the guy just wandered off, leaving us in stitches. The night ended with Alex asking for my number. "So, Sarah, can I text you sometime? Maybe continue this conversation without the drunk party crashers?" I grinned, feeling that flutter in my stomach again. "I'd like that," I said, and gave him my number. Walking home that night, I couldn't stop smiling. I had a feeling that this was the start of something special. Little did I know how right I was, and just how much of a roller coaster was waiting for us down the line. The day Alex and I decided to meet his parents, my stomach was in knots. I knew they were well off, living in a world that seemed miles away from my simple upbringing. Alex tried to ease my worries on the drive over, his hand finding mine as he glanced my way. "They're gonna love you, Sarah. Just be yourself," he reassured, squeezing my hand. "Yeah, if being myself doesn't include being a nervous wreck," I muttered, trying to smile. We pulled up to a house that looked more like something out of a magazine than a place where people actually lived. It was massive, the kind of place with more rooms than you'd know what to do with. As we walked up to the front door, Alex gave me an encouraging nod, and we stepped into the lion's den. His mom, let's call her Elaine, greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. His dad, whom we'll call Richard, was more straightforward, offering a firm handshake that felt more like a test of strength than a greeting. "So, you're the girl Alex has been spending all his time with," Elaine said, leading us into the living room. Her tone was polite, but there was an edge to it that made me brace myself. "Yes, Mrs. Jackson. It's so nice to finally meet you," I said, my voice a bit too high-pitched even to my own ears. "Dinner's ready. Let's eat," Richard announced, cutting through the awkward pleasantries. Dinner was an exercise in dodging subtly sharp questions and trying to make small talk that felt like pulling teeth. Elaine was particularly skilled at backhanded compliments. "It's so brave of you to pursue a career in web design, especially coming from such a humble background," she said, her eyes scanning me like I was an interesting specimen under a microscope. "Yeah, well, we can't all inherit a business, can we? Gotta work with what we've got," I shot back, a little more defensively than I intended. Alex shot me a look, a mix of admiration and "please let's not start a war at the dinner table." Richard, for the most part, stayed out of the fray, focusing on his food more than the conversation. But when he did chime in, it was with pointed questions about my intentions with Alex. So, Sarah, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Still trying to make it in web design, or have you considered something more stable? I took a deep breath, trying not to let my irritation show. Well, Richard, I'm pretty committed to my goals. Stability is great, but so is following your passion, right? The dinner dragged on, with every course feeling like another round in an invisible boxing match. By the time dessert was served, I was mentally exhausted, running on autopilot. On the drive back, Alex was quiet, a storm brewing in his eyes. I'm sorry about that. They can be a bit intense. I laughed, the tension from dinner finally starting to ebb away. Intense? That's one way to put it. But don't worry, I can handle a little heat. Alex grinned, reaching for my hand again. That's my girl. You know, you really impressed me tonight. Standing your ground like that. Yeah, well, someone's gotta keep your parents on their toes, I joked, feeling the night's stress melt away in the warmth of his smile. Life with Alex was everything I could have hoped for and more. We married surrounded by those who genuinely cared for us, ready to start our new life together. Almost immediately after, we were blessed with the arrival of our son, a bundle of joy who became the center of our world. Yet, despite the happiness our little one brought into our lives, a shadow loomed over our newfound bliss. Alex's parents refused to accept our son as part of the family. They harbored doubts, unfounded and cruel, about the paternity of our child, suggesting he wasn't truly Alex's. One evening, after we'd put our little guy to bed, Alex and I were slumped on the couch, each nursing a cup of tea, when he dropped the bombshell. Sarah, my mom called today, he began, the words heavy. She's insisting on a paternity test. I choked on my tea, coughing as the words sunk in. She what? My voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. Yeah, I know, it's insane. She's out of line, Alex said, running a hand through his hair, looking as frustrated as I felt. Why now? What's her problem with us being happy? I was fuming, the idea of it all so offensive, so invasive. Alex sighed. She's convinced herself that. I don't know, that our son isn't mine. Says it's for the family's peace of mind. Peace of mind? What a load of crap. I snapped, my temper flaring. And what did you say to that? I told her she was being ridiculous, that it's an insult to even suggest it. But she's adamant. She's even willing to pay for the test, Alex explained, his tone defeated. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing. And if we say no? Then she threatens to cut ties, disown me, or worse, drag us through some legal battle. She's bluffing, I think. But Sarah, I don't want this hanging over our heads. I stopped pacing, looking at him, the anger simmering down to a painful realization. So, we just do it? Prove her wrong and shove it in her face? Alex nodded. Yeah. We do it, not for them, but for us. To end this nonsense. The day of the test, we were a quiet storm of nerves and silent defiance. The clinic was sterile and impersonal, the process clinical and cold. We gave our samples, our little guy oblivious to the tension, babbling happily in my arms. On the ride home, Alex tried to lighten the mood. Imagine the look on her face when the results come in. Congratulations, it's a grandson. I couldn't help but snort, despite the situation. She'll probably accuse the lab of being in on a conspiracy. We laughed, a brief respite from the weight of it all. The wait for the results was agonizing, each day stretching on. When the envelope finally arrived, we sat together, hand in hand, as Alex tore it open. Reading the results, a mix of relief and vindication washed over us. 99.99% Alex was indeed the father. I grabbed the phone, dialing his mother's number, before I could second-guess myself. Mrs. Jackson, you might want to sit down for this. The test results? Alex is the father. Shocking, right? My voice dripped with sarcasm. There was a pause on the line, a moment of silence that spoke volumes. "Well, I suppose that settles that, then," she said, her voice cold, devoid of apology. "Yeah, it does. And let me make something clear," I continued, my voice steady and firm. "This is the last time you question my family. The next time you want to play detective, maybe start with a mirror." It's been 10 years. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm for us, despite the lingering shadows of past conflicts. Then, out of the blue, on a lazy Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name that made my heart sink and my stomach twist into knots: Elaine, Alex's mom. I glanced at Alex, who was sprawled on the couch with our son, both engrossed in some cartoon that involved more explosions than dialogue. He caught my look and mouthed, "Who is it?" When I showed him the phone, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. Taking a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself. "Hello? Sarah, it's Elaine. I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I wanted to wish my grandson a happy 10th birthday," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I was taken aback, not only by the call itself, but by the gentleness in her tone. Thank you. That's unexpected." There was a pause, and then she continued, "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Sarah. About everything. I know I've made mistakes, and I want to try to make things right. Could we possibly meet and talk?" I was speechless, a rare occurrence for me. I glanced at Alex again, his face a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I'll need to discuss it with Alex. Can I get back to you?" "Of course, dear. Please do. And tell Alex I said hello." As I ended the call, Alex was immediately by my side, our son looking up at us, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Was that really my mom? What did she want? Alex asked, his voice tight with concern. "She wants to talk, says she wants to make amends. Even wished our boy a happy birthday," I said, still trying to wrap my head around the conversation. Alex rubbed his neck, a sign of his unease. "Wow, I didn't see that coming. What do you think? Are we ready to open that door again?" I sighed, watching our son return his attention to the TV, blissfully unaware of the adult complexities swirling around him. "I don't know, Alex. Part of me wants to believe people can change. But another part. I'm scared of getting hurt again, of us getting hurt." Alex took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. We've been through worse, haven't we? If she's genuinely trying to make amends, maybe it's worth hearing her out. For his sake," he said, nodding towards our son. When Elaine, my mother-in-law, showed up at our doorstep the following week, she wasn't empty-handed. She brought with her a high-end gaming console for my son, Jamie. The boy's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw it. "Whoa, is this for me?" he gasped, his excitement palpable. "Yes, sweetheart, it's for you," Elaine said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I watched the exchange, my stomach knotted with suspicion. What was she playing at? Later, as we sat in our living room, Elaine dropped the bombshell about her husband, Richard. "He's very ill," she said, her usual tough exterior cracking a bit. "Stomach cancer. Doctors say he doesn't have long." The news hit hard, even with the strained relationship we had with them. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom," Alex managed, the shock clear in his voice. "That's why I want you all to come over next weekend. He wants to see you, especially Jamie," she added, her gaze lingering on our son. Despite my wariness, we agreed. It seemed the right thing to do, given the circumstances. The visit to their mansion was as uncomfortable as I anticipated. Richard looked a shadow of his former self, his illness taking a visible toll. Jamie, oblivious to the tension, was thrilled with the grandeur of the place. "Wow, this place is huge," he exclaimed, his young eyes wide with wonder. As the evening wore on, Elaine took Alex and me aside for a private talk. What she said next floored me. "We need an heir for the business, and we want Jamie to be that heir," she stated, her tone matter of fact. I blinked, taken aback. "What about your other grandson, Matthew? Isn't he the heir?" Elaine's lips thinned. "Matthew had an accident. A spinal fracture. He can't take over the business now." Her indifference to Matthew's plight chilled me. It was all about the business for her. "So, you're just discarding him because he's injured? And now you want Jamie as your backup plan?" I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. "It's not like that, Sarah. It's about securing our family's future. And Jamie is part of this family," Elaine countered, but her words felt hollow. Alex and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between us. "We'll need to think about this, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "Jamie's future isn't something we're going to rush into." Elaine nodded, though I could tell she wasn't pleased. "Just remember, we're willing to cover all his education expenses. It's an opportunity of a lifetime." The ride back home was quiet, each of us lost in thought. This wasn't just about a business or an inheritance. It was about our son's life, his happiness. And no amount of money could make us compromise on that. After Elaine's bombshell about wanting Jamie to be the heir, Alex and I had a long talk. It was late, the kind of hour that blurs lines and softens shadows, making hard truths a bit easier to speak. "Can you believe this, Alex? She basically wants to trade in Matthew for Jamie because he's hurt. It's like, I don't know, picking players for some sick game," I said, frustration bubbling up. Alex rubbed his face, looking as tired as I felt. "Yeah, it's messed up. Mom's always been about the business, but this? It's cold, even for her. And what she said about Matthew. It's like he doesn't matter to her anymore. How can she be so heartless?" My voice cracked a bit. This wasn't just about offers and inheritance, it was about family, about doing what's right. "We're not doing it, Sarah. We're not letting Jamie get sucked into her twisted world. He's a kid, not a chess piece," Alex said, his voice firm. "Exactly. He should be playing with toys, not getting groomed to take over a business he knows nothing about," I added, feeling a surge of protective anger. The next day, I called Elaine, my stomach in knots, but my resolve firm. "Elaine, we need to talk about your offer," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh? Have you come to your senses, then?" Her voice was smug, expecting compliance. "No, we haven't come to our senses. We're not letting Jamie be part of this scheme of yours. He's a child, Elaine. And what you're doing to Matthew is unforgivable," I shot back, my anger rising. She scoffed. "You're being short-sighted, Sarah. You don't understand what it means to be part of a legacy. To have power. You're just an uneducated girl playing house." That stung, but I plowed on. "Maybe I don't understand your world, Elaine, but I do know that what you're offering isn't right for Jamie. We want no part of it." Her tone turned icy. "You'll regret this, Sarah. I'll make sure of it." The threat hung in the air, heavy and ominous. After we hung up, I felt a mix of fear and defiance. I didn't have to wait long to see what Elaine's revenge would look like. The very next morning, a knock at the door revealed two social workers, their badges and serious expressions a prelude to trouble. "Mrs. and Mr. Jackson, we've received a complaint alleging that you're mistreating your son. We need to talk to you and conduct a preliminary assessment," one of them explained, her voice neutral, but not unkind. Alex and I exchanged a look of disbelief. "Mistreating Jamie? That's ridiculous. Who would even say something like that?" Alex sputtered, his confusion mirrored in my own heart. The social workers remained professional. "We're not at liberty to disclose the source of the complaint, but please understand, we have to investigate all claims." They asked to see Jamie, to talk to him, and to inspect our home. It was humiliating, invasive, but we complied, knowing we had nothing to hide. Jamie, bless his heart, was confused but told them how much he loved us, how we played together, and about the new game console Grandma gave him. After their visit, they seemed satisfied that the complaint was baseless but informed us that they would open a case for a standard 60-day review. Once they left, Alex exploded. "My mom has gone too far this time. This is war." I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. Elaine's move was low, even for her. But Alex and I were united, ready to protect Jamie from her manipulations, no matter what it took. A week passed, with an uneasy quiet. Then, as if challenging the peace, the social workers returned, this time with a new claim from Elaine, my mother-in-law. They relayed that there had been a report Jamie was left home alone, a situation we knew never occurred. The accusation was ludicrous, but the implication was severe, and it sent a chill down my spine. After the social workers left, Alex, with a storm brewing in his eyes, called his mother. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but the tension in the room was palpable. "Mom, this has to stop. You're not just crossing lines, you're obliterating them. Why would you say Jamie was left alone?" His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. The response was a cold laugh that echoed through the speakerphone, sending a shiver down my spine. "Oh, Alex, you really don't know me at all if you think I'll just stand by. Everything will go as I have planned." The following week, our nightmare scenario unfolded. Jamie didn't come home from school. Frantic, we called around, only to discover Elaine had picked him up, claiming she had our permission. My heart stopped. When we finally got Jamie on the phone, his words twisted the knife deeper. "Grandma says I can stay with her. She buys me stuff and lets me do what I want," he said. The realization that Elaine would go to such lengths to manipulate our son, to tear him from us, was a wake-up call. We had tried to handle things calmly, to keep the peace for the sake of family unity, but it was clear that Elaine's motivations were driven by control and spite, not love or concern for Jamie's well-being. With heavy hearts, but a determined resolve, we involved the police, explaining the situation and insisting on our son's return. The legal system, slow but eventually effective, sided with us, recognizing the manipulation and unlawfulness of Elaine's actions. The trial felt like a storm that had raged around us, threatening to pull us under. But when it finally passed, the skies cleared in a way we hadn't expected. Richard's death came as a shock, a somber reminder of how fleeting and fragile life could be. Yet, in his passing, he left behind a message, a final act that would redefine the future of our family. It turned out Richard had made some unexpected decisions regarding his estate. Most of it was left to Alex and me, a gesture that spoke volumes of his silent observations and perhaps his regrets. He also made sure to provide for his eldest grandson's rehabilitation, a sign of love for his grandchild despite everything. Elaine was left with just a small monthly allowance, a decision that, no doubt, came as a shock to her. One evening, Alex and I sat down with Jamie, the glow from his nightlight casting soft shadows across his room. It was time to talk about the future, about the choices, and the legacy his grandparents had left behind. "Jamie, you know how Grandpa Richard left us some money, right?" Alex started, his voice gentle, but serious. "Yeah, Dad. Does that mean I can get more video games?" Jamie's innocent question brought a smile to my face, a brief moment of lightness in the gravity of our conversation. "It means a lot more than that, Bud," I chimed in, ruffling his hair. "It means you have options for your future. For school, for what you want to be when you grow up." Jamie looked between us, his young mind trying to grasp the weight of our words. "But I don't know what I want to be yet." "Is that okay?" "Absolutely," Alex assured him. "The most important thing is that you get to choose, to find what makes you happy. And we'll be here to support you, no matter what." "And what about Grandma Elaine?" Jamie's question hung in the air, a reminder of the wound still healing. "We'll deal with that as it comes. But for now, let's focus on us, on our family," I said, hoping to ease his concerns. The days that followed were filled with discussions about trusts, scholarships, and savings for Jamie's education. We wanted to ensure that whatever he decided to pursue, the resources would be there to support him. It wasn't just about securing his future financially, it was about giving him the freedom to dream, to explore, and to become whoever he wanted to be. As for Elaine, the relationship remained strained, a bridge partially burned by past actions. Yet, we held out hope that time might bring healing, might soften the sharp edges of conflict and misunderstanding. For Jamie's sake, we remained open to reconciliation, to finding a way forward that could include her, albeit with boundaries firmly in place.
It was the muffled thuds that woke me from my restless slumber. Disoriented, I blinked at the blinking red numbers on my nightstand, 2:17 a.m. The noise persisted, followed by what sounded like hurried footsteps. Adrenaline surged through my body as I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops. Before I could dial, a frantic knocking erupted from my front door. "Arya, are you all right? Open up." It was Mr. Halgren, my elderly neighbor from across the hall. Clutching my robe tightly, I rushed to the door and peered through the peephole. His face was etched with concern. "What's going on?" I asked, unlocking the door. "I heard strange noises from your brother's place next door," he said, his voice quivering. "It sounded like someone was breaking in." My stomach knotted at the mention of my estranged brother, Elric. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the ugly inheritance dispute after our parents' tragic deaths. But the mere thought of him rekindled the bitterness that still simmered inside me. Pushing those feelings aside, I followed Mr. Halgren down the dimly lit hallway. As we approached Elric's apartment, an eerie silence filled the air. I peered through the crack of his partially open door and gasped. The place was ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, and belongings strewn across the floor. My heart raced as I instinctively clutched Mr. Halgren's arm. "We should call the police," he urged. But before I could respond, a sickening realization hit me. If Elric's place was broken into, what about mine? Rushing back, I flung open my apartment door and froze. The scene that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. My sanctuary, the space I had so carefully curated, was in complete disarray. "Oh, dear Lord," Mr. Halgren muttered behind me. I stumbled inside, surveying the chaos. Picture frames shattered, books scattered, cushions ripped open. It was as if a tornado had ripped through. But one thing immediately caught my eye, the glowing screen of my laptop, still intact amidst the wreckage. With trembling hands, I lifted the device and felt my world shift. Dozens of emails, all sent from my account, detailed confidential information about my employer's cybersecurity protocols. It was a damning trail of corporate espionage, and it was undeniably linked to me. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching the laptop to my chest. Someone had framed me, and deep down, I knew exactly who it was. The question was why? And how far would Elric go to destroy me? As the initial shock wore off, my mind raced to make sense of the incriminating evidence staring back at me. Corporate espionage was a federal offense, one that could land me in prison for years. But why would Elric go to such lengths to frame me? The answer hit me like a ton of bricks. The inheritance money from our parents. After their untimely deaths in a car accident 5 years ago, the bulk of their considerable estate had been left to me. Elric had always resented that decision, claiming our parents favored me, but the truth was, his reckless spending and mounting debts made him an untrustworthy custodian of the family's wealth. With a few clicks, I accessed the email trail, my hands shaking as I scanned the damning messages. Each one contained sensitive data that could cripple my employer's network security, product roadmaps, customer lists, even source code for their flagship software. And they were all linked back to my corporate account. "This can't be happening," I muttered, bile rising in my throat. "What is it, dear?" Mr. Halgren asked, his voice laced with concern. I turned the laptop toward him, revealing the incriminating messages. "Someone's trying to frame me for stealing company secrets." His eyes widened as he read through the emails. But who would do such a thing? The answer was painfully obvious, but I couldn't bring myself to voice the name. Instead, I pulled up the account logs, tracing the origin of the messages. To my dismay, the timestamps aligned with the time frame Mr. Halgren had mentioned, when he heard noises coming from Elric's apartment. "Arya?" Mr. Halgren prodded gently. I swallowed hard, the bitter truth leaving an acrid taste in my mouth. It was Elric. He broke into my place and sent these emails to make it look like I'm selling company secrets. The elderly man's brow furrowed in disbelief. But why would your own brother do such a terrible thing? A mirthless laugh escaped my lips. Money, greed, jealousy, take your pick. I shook my head, disgusted. He's always resented that our parents left the inheritance to me instead of him. Memories of our last explosive argument flooded back, Elric's words cutting like knives. You don't deserve a penny of what's rightfully mine. I'll make you pay for this, Arya. Mark my words. At the time, I'd brushed off his threats as empty tantrums. But now, as I stared at the damning evidence, the true depths of his depravity became chillingly clear. We need to call the authorities, Mr. Hallgren urged, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I wanted nothing more than to have Elric arrested, to see him pay for his betrayal. But something held me back, a nagging voice in my head that whispered of another way, a path that would ensure his downfall was complete and utterly merciless. Clenching my jaw, I made a decision that would set in motion a vicious game of revenge, one that would force Elric to reap the consequences of his actions in the most devastating way possible. Not yet, I said, my voice steely with resolve. I have a better idea. Over the next few days, I threw myself into an investigation to uncover the full scope of Elric's treachery. Using my cybersecurity skills, I traced the origin of the incriminating emails back to his apartment's Wi-Fi network. But that was just the beginning. Digging deeper, I discovered security footage from the building's parking garage that confirmed my worst suspicions. The grainy video showed Elric slipping into my apartment complex around 10 p.m., just a few hours before Mr. Hallgren had heard the disturbance next door. My blood boiled as I watched my brother's familiar figure furtively making his way inside, no doubt to plant the evidence that would frame me for corporate espionage. The sheer, calculated nature of his betrayal left me reeling. I knew I needed to confront him, to look him in the eye and demand an explanation for his despicable actions. But part of me feared what I might find lurking beneath the surface, the true depths of his depravity. Still, I steeled my resolve and arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe, neutral territory where he wouldn't feel cornered. As I waited at a secluded table, my fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the tabletop. The bell above the door jingled, and Elric sauntered in, his expression a mask of casual indifference, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room before finally settling on me. Arya? He greeted flatly, sliding into the chair across from me. It's been a while. Cut the crap, Elric, I snapped, shoving my laptop across the table. The incriminating emails were displayed in all their damning glory. You broke into my place and tried to frame me for selling company secrets. Why? For a moment, his facade cracked, and I glimpsed the churning mixture of rage and desperation that simmered beneath. But then, just as quickly, he regained his composure, his lips curling into a sneer. You think you're so smart, don't you? He spat, leaning forward menacingly. Always the perfect one, Mommy and Daddy's golden child. Well, let me tell you something. That inheritance should have been mine. I recoiled at the venom in his voice, but he wasn't done. Do you have any idea what I've been through? He hissed. Drowning in debt, struggling to make ends meet while you're living the high life off our parents' money. You didn't deserve a penny of what they left you. His words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I found myself struggling to breathe. This wasn't just about greed or jealousy. It was a twisted, all-consuming hatred that had festered for years. So you decided to try and send me to prison? I countered, incredulous. You're sick, Elric, truly sick. He let out a harsh laugh, devoid of any mirth. Prison would have been too good for you. No, I wanted to see you utterly ruined, stripped of everything you hold dear. That inheritance was supposed to be my salvation, my way out of this hellhole I've been living in. And you stole that from me. In that moment, I saw the true depths of his malice, and a part of me shriveled inside. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stripping him of the power he so desperately craved, dismantling his delusions of entitlement until he had nothing left. As I stared into the abyss of his blackened soul, I knew there was no turning back. The game was on, and I would stop at nothing to ensure Elric's downfall was absolute. In the days following my confrontation with Elric, a cold determination settled over me. His twisted sense of entitlement and utter disregard for the consequences of his actions had solidified my resolve. He needed to be stopped, and I was the only one who could do it. But I couldn't just turn him in, not after the lengths he'd gone to frame me. No, I needed a more surgical strike, a plan that would dismantle his delusions of grandeur and leave him with nowhere to run. Digging deeper into his activities, I uncovered a trail of shady dealings and black market transactions, a desperate attempt to fund his lavish lifestyle through illegal means. Suddenly, his obsession with the inheritance money made sickening sense. It wasn't just about greed, it was about fueling his criminal enterprises. With each new discovery, the pieces fell into place, revealing the true extent of his depravity. He was a cancer, slowly spreading his poison through our family's legacy, and I was the only one with the skills to excise that malignant growth once and for all. I began meticulously documenting every shred of evidence, building an airtight case against him. Bank statements, encrypted communications, even grainy surveillance footage, nothing was left uncovered. It was all part of a larger strategy, a chess game where I held the advantage of foresight and preparation. As the weeks ticked by, I could sense Elric's growing unease, the way his eyes would dart around whenever we crossed paths, as if he knew the walls were closing in. But still, he maintained his facade of arrogance, convinced that his misdeeds were safely hidden from view. Little did he know that I was merely biding my time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. That chance came in the form of a family gathering, one of those obligatory affairs where distant relatives would congregate and exchange forced pleasantries. Elric, ever the opportunist, saw it as a chance to flaunt his ill-gotten wealth, parading around like a peacock in his designer suit and flashy watch. But I had other plans. Carefully, I began weaving a web of subtle revelations, dropping breadcrumbs of information about Elric's shady dealings in hushed conversations with our more influential relatives. A whispered comment here, a pointed glance there, each carefully calculated to plant the seeds of suspicion. And of course, I made sure Elric was always within earshot, close enough to catch the murmurs of an impending investigation, the hints of his empire crumbling around him. I could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed veneer, the beads of sweat forming on his brow as paranoia took root. With each passing hour, his forced laughter became more strained, his movements more erratic. By the time the evening drew to a close, Elric was a shell of his former self, his once cocky swagger replaced by a haunted look of desperation. As he made his way out, our eyes locked for a brief moment, and I knew he could see the triumph glinting in my gaze. The game was nearing its climax, and I held all the cards. All that was left was to sit back and watch as Elric's world unraveled, the consequences of his actions finally catching up to him in the most poetic of ways. The weeks following the family gathering were a masterclass in psychological warfare. With each passing day, I could see the toll my carefully orchestrated revelations were taking on Elric. The once cocky swagger had given way to a perpetual state of unease, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. And I was more than happy to oblige, strategically leaking just enough information to keep the pressure mounting. A whispered conversation here, a pointed look there, each one designed to reinforce the growing paranoia that his world was crumbling around him. It was a delicate dance, one that required equal parts patience and precision. Too much, too soon, and he might bolt, scattering his misdeeds to the wind. But too little, and the fear might dissipate, allowing him to regain his footing. So I bided my time, methodically tightening the noose until the slightest movement would spell his undoing. The breaking point came one evening as I was leaving the office. My phone buzzed with a frantic call from Elric, his voice a strangled whisper on the other end. "Arya, please, you have to help me." I could barely contain my smirk as I replied, feigning ignorance. "Help you with what, exactly?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his desperate mind, weighing the pros and cons of confiding in me. It's about the stuff I've been involved with," he finally admitted, his words laced with thinly veiled panic. "The illegal dealings, the black market trades, everything. Someone's on to me, Arya. I don't know how, but they know." A twisted sense of satisfaction unfurled in my chest at the sound of his franticness. This was it, the moment I'd been meticulously orchestrating for weeks. The trap was sprung, and Elric was caught squarely in its jaws. "Well, well, well," I murmured, savoring the moment. "It seems the tables have turned, dear brother." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and I could envision his eyes widening in horrified realization. "You," he stammered, the word thick with accusation. "You did this. You set me up." A low, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. "I didn't set you up, Elric. I merely provided the rope for you to hang yourself with. A rope expertly woven from your own misdeeds and insatiable greed." There was a beat of silence, and then his voice returned, low and pleading. "Arya, please, you have to help me. I'm your brother, flesh and blood. Whatever I've done, I'll make it right, I swear. Just don't let them take me." His desperate pleas should have stirred something within me, some lingering shred of familial loyalty. But as I stood there, bathed in the flickering glow of street lamps, all I felt was a cold, steely resolve. "You brought this on yourself, Elric," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or compassion. "And now you'll face the consequences of your actions alone." With that, I ended the call, leaving him to stew in the bitter juices of his own making. The endgame was in motion, and there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the authorities closed in like a vice, meticulously dismantling Elric's criminal empire piece by piece. And through it all, I watched from the sidelines, a silent spectator to his downfall, reveling in the sweet taste of justice being served. The sound of the doorbell pierced the tranquil silence of my apartment, jolting me from my reverie. With a resigned sigh, I already knew who it was. Sure enough, when I opened the door, Elric stood on the other side, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled and haggard. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark circles, and his expensive suit hung loosely from his frame. "You have to help me, Arya," he rasped, his voice a mere shadow of its former arrogant timbre. "They're closing in, and I don't know what to do." I regarded him coolly, unmoved by his desperate plea. "And why? Pray tell, should I lift a finger to help you?" Elric's face contorted into a mask of anguish, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of his dire circumstances. "Because I'm your brother, damn it! We're family!" A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Family? You forfeited any claim to that when you tried to frame me and steal what little I had left of our parents' legacy." His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. "I was desperate, Arya," he pleaded, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "You have to understand, I was drowning in debt, and the inheritance was my only way out. I never meant for things to go this far." I arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. "And the corporate espionage? The black market dealings? Were those acts of desperation too?" Elric flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor in shame. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I'm paying for them, Arya. Isn't that enough?" Shaking my head, I fixed him with a steely glare. "No, Elric. It's not enough. Not even close." His head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fear. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you brought this upon yourself," I stated, my voice hardening. "You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. The authorities are closing in, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." Elric's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might actually break down and cry. But then, like a switch being flipped, his expression hardened, and a familiar glint of defiance flashed in his eyes. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" He spat, his tone laced with venom. "Watching me squirm, seeing me brought low. Well, let me tell you something, sister dearest. I'm not going down without a fight." I met his gaze unflinchingly, unimpressed by his bravado. "It's over, Elric. Your little criminal empire is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." He opened his mouth, no doubt to hurl another venomous retort. But the sound of approaching sirens cut him off. His head whipped around, eyes widening in panic as the wail of the sirens grew louder. "This isn't over," he hissed, backing away from my door. "You haven't seen the last of me, Arya." But even as the words left his lips, I could see the fear flickering in his eyes. He knew it was a hollow threat, a desperate attempt to cling to whatever shred of power he had left. As the police cars screeched to a halt outside my building, Elric turned and bolted, disappearing into the night like a cornered rat fleeing from the light. And in that moment, I felt a sense of profound satisfaction wash over me. The game was finally over, and I had won. Elric's downfall was complete, and he had no one to blame but himself. The weeks following Elric's desperate visit were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, the authorities had wasted no time in dismantling his criminal enterprise, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice. I found myself being called in for questioning, forced to recount every sordid detail of my brother's misdeeds. It was a cathartic experience, purging the festering wound of his betrayal with each damning revelation. Through it all, Elric remained defiant, lashing out at anyone and everyone within his reach. His once charming facade had been stripped away, revealing the true depths of his malice and depravity. The trial itself was a media circus, with reporters and camera crews swarming the courthouse like vultures circling a carcass. Elric, of course, played it up for the cameras, alternating between proclamations of innocence and vitriolic tirades against me. But in the end, the evidence was too overwhelming, the trail of breadcrumbs I had carefully laid too intricate to unravel. One by one, the charges were read: corporate espionage, fraud, racketeering, and a litany of other offenses that would make even the most hardened criminal blanch. And through it all, Elric maintained his arrogant sneer, as if daring the world to try and break him. That is, until the verdict was announced. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the gathered spectators before finally settling on my brother. On the charges of corporate espionage, fraud, racketeering, and numerous counts of illegal black market dealings, this court finds the defendant, Elric Lane, guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog, and for a moment I thought Elric might actually collapse. His face drained of color, his mouth working soundlessly as the full weight of the verdict crashed down upon him. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. His features hardened, and he fixed me with a look of pure unadulterated hatred. "You did this?" he hissed, straining against the bailiffs who were already moving to escort him from the courtroom. "You're the one who destroyed everything, Arya. You'll pay for this, I swear to God." His venomous words were met with stoic silence from the gallery, and I merely held his gaze, unflinching. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph or vindication, just a profound sense of relief that the nightmare was finally over. The weeks and months that followed were a blur of sentencing hearings and legal proceedings, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of Elric's once promising future. He was slapped with a hefty prison sentence, as well as crippling fines and restitutions that would ensure he would never again taste the lavish lifestyle he had so coveted. And through it all, I remained a silent observer, watching as the brother I had once loved was slowly stripped of everything: his wealth, his freedom, his very identity. It was a bitter victory, to be sure, but a necessary one. Elric's greed and envy had poisoned our family's legacy, and the only way to excise that malignant growth was to cut it out, root and stem. As I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching him be led away in shackles, I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. The chapter of my life that had been defined by his malevolence was finally closed, and I was free to move on, to forge a new path, unburdened by the weight of his betrayal. It was a bittersweet feeling, tempered by the lingering sorrow of what might have been, had he chosen a different path. But in the end, Elric had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it, alone, with nothing but the bitter taste of karma to keep him company. Months ticked by, the weight of Elric's downfall gradually lifting from my shoulders with each passing day. It was a strange feeling, this newfound lightness, as if a dark cloud had finally parted, allowing the warmth of the sun to wash over me once again. I found myself rediscovering simple pleasures I had long taken for granted: the freedom to come and go as I pleased without the specter of his malice looming overhead, the ability to surround myself with people who genuinely cared for me, not just what I could provide them. It was a rebirth of sorts, a chance to shed the baggage of my past and forge a new path forward, one untainted by the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Of course, there were still moments when the memories would come creeping back, uninvited guests at the party of my newfound contentment. But those fleeting pangs of anger or sorrow were quickly tempered by the knowledge that I had emerged victorious, that Elric's twisted machinations had ultimately been his undoing. In many ways, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to weather even the most devastating of storms, and come out stronger on the other side. It was a lesson I carried with me as I embarked on the next chapter of my life, leaving the city that had been the backdrop for so much turmoil and striking out in search of greener pastures. My newfound independence manifested itself in the form of a burgeoning cybersecurity consulting firm, a venture that allowed me to channel my skills and expertise into something truly meaningful. And with each successful project, each satisfied client, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that had long been denied me. But perhaps the greatest source of fulfillment came in the form of mentoring young women just starting out in the field, imparting not just technical knowledge, but also the hard-won lessons of perseverance and self-belief that had carried me through my darkest hours. It was a full-circle moment, a chance to pay forward the kindness and support that had once been so desperately lacking in my own life. And so as the sun began to dip below the horizon on another eventful day, I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had brought me to this point, the triumphs, the heartaches, and everything in between. The sound of the doorbell pulled me from my reverie, and I rose to answer it, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Mr. Halgren?" I greeted warmly, ushering the elderly man inside. "Right on time, as always," he chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "You know me, Arya. Punctuality is my middle name." As I led him to the dining room, already set for our weekly dinner ritual, I couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude for his unwavering presence throughout the ordeal with Elric. He had been my rock, my anchor in the storm, and for that I would be forever grateful. "So," he said, settling into his chair with a contented sigh, "how's the new business venture coming along?" I felt a genuine smile spread across my face as I launched into an enthusiastic update, the weight of my past finally lifting as I looked ahead to the boundless possibilities that awaited. It was a new beginning, a fresh start untainted by the shadows of my brother's malice. And as I sat there, basking in the warmth of Mr. Halgren's company, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free.